Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Last year I started a series of videos where I wanted to archive my RPG collection, going through things like the Call of Cthulhu stuff that I have, Dragon Age, Pathfinder, Starfinder, and then getting into the Dungeons & Dragons stuff. I also wanted to have an accompanying list on my Facebook page, like a note that you can click on and sort of see there, and I am woefully behind on keeping up with that, but I wanted to get back into doing the videos because I actually had a lot of fun doing them. And so the last one that I had shown was my 3.0 collection. 3.0 was sort of right the point where I really started getting into D&D. And by 2002, late 2002 into 2003, is when I really seriously started getting into collecting. So I didn't go back and get a lot of 3.0 stuff, but there was a lot of 3.5 stuff that I got. This video is going to go over the stuff for 3.5 as a whole. It's not going to show my 3.5 Eberron books or Forgotten Realms stuff because I've already done separate videos with those in there, so I didn't want it to be redundant that way. This might end up being a two-parter, just based off the amount of stuff, because I want to talk a little bit about each of the books, because I haven't really thought about them too much over the last few years, and it would be kind of just, nice to look at them and sort of just reminisce, I guess, a little bit about, my experiences with them. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail. I might do separate videos for like different sub-series of 3.5 stuff, like the complete books, the races series, other things along those lines. So it's not something I'm going to rule out at this point in time, but I'm just going to give some general thoughts on, what I thought of the book, how much I enjoyed it, if I used it, if I didn't like it, those sorts of things. So without further ado, let's just get right into it here. The first thing I want to show off is the 3.5. This is the gift set that came out in December of 2003, which is when Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 first came out. And it ran from summer 2003 until the summer of 2008 when D&D 4th edition took over. So this is over the course of 5 years. The last year and a half or so of the 3.5 run, they were really sort of gearing towards 4th edition, and I didn't get a lot of those books because the quality of the stuff they were putting out I felt was kind of on the downward slide, and I just wasn't interested in spending money. Unfortunately, it means I missed out on a couple of gems that I kind of wish I had. But I'm not going to go out of my way to try to find them. If I get them at a good price, then, that's fine. But anyway, so let's just get into it. So this is the gift set for D&D 3.5. So, there is some obvious shelfware, as you can see. This is something that at this point in time is almost 17 years old. So there's going to be some shelfware and stuff like that. But it was still, pretty cool. Had a nice design to it, and the 3rd edition books overall had a very, very cool concept in the way that they designed the physical books themselves. And this gift set is something along those lines as well. So it's just a really, really cool set to have. And there was a story behind how I got this. I believe I told it in a separate video, but if I haven't, I'm pretty sure that I did. If I haven't, let me know, and I'd be more than happy to go over it here. Retail price was $89.95. Oh, if I can get it to focus here, $89.95 US. It was obviously more than that Canadian, but still really cool to have the slipcover, because I already had the rule books at the time. I didn't need to get this, but basically the game store owner that I used to go to back when he had a store, some stuff was shipped, and they decided to just use the slipcase as another form of packaging inside the box, keep everything safe. So he sold me this, and again, I don't want to go into too much about that now, but if I haven't told that story, let me know, and I'd be happy to do that again, because it was there's some funny stuff behind that. So after that, of course, we have our core rule books. So right here, I have, this is my original 3.5 Player's Handbook, but this is the one that I used as a dungeon master. So I knew that at the time, a lot of my players weren't going to be interested in converting from third to 3.5 because the group I was playing with, honestly, at the time, was probably the reason why 3.5 had to be created in the first place. So the first player's handbook that I had actually had a visible scratch that came, when the book arrived in store. So that was one that it's like, it was a very easy way of telling which one it was, so that's the one I let players use. This is the version that I used as a dungeon master, so it rarely left my home, especially when I started running games from home with a different group. But this is one that I've had since 2003, so this is a 17-year-old book at this point in time. And then I've got my original Dungeon Master's Guide. So this is the one that I bought like a week after I bought the Player's Handbook. And the story behind me getting into 3.5 was essentially for months. We had been talking about how it seemed excessive, the amount of things that they were doing for 3.5. And, friends and I talked about how we didn't really have any interest in buying it, or, we might. My idea was I'd get the player's handbook and then house rule in the stuff that I thought was good and keep the rest of the 3.0 stuff going. But as it turned out, it became easier to house rule out the things in 3.5 I didn't like. And as much as I was sort of against the idea of 3.5 at first, as soon as the owner of the store started unpacking his order and I laid my eyes on the cover of the player's handbook for the first time, I was just like, oh, that book's nice looking. I want to have it. So my protesting against 3.5 lasted up until release day. But this is my DMG. It's got a little bit of scratch on, a little bit of wear. But this was something that I used this book on a weekly basis for like 12 years. So for several years after third edition 3.5 had gone out of print, I was still making pretty regular use of this. Now, one thing you may notice is that those are the only two of my original books that I have. I don't have my original monster manual anymore. I had sold that to a friend of mine who wanted to run Pathfinder, and he didn't have the bestiary, but the original Pathfinder was very similar to 3.5 D&D, so I sold that to him, and the reason that I sold that to him was this was 2013, so I already had the 3.5 reprints. So these were sort of like a collector series of books that came out in 2013. In 2012, they had re-released the first edition core rule books, and they were really popular. People, responded really well to them. So they did the same thing with 3.5, and then eventually did the same thing with second edition and even 0 edition. So there were lots of reprinted stuff there. And they're just really nice covers, nice and shiny, and I got them for a pretty good price. For me, these are the ones that I was going to use going forward if I decided to continue running 3.5, which was not overly likely by that point in time. But here we have the Dungeon Master's Guide, which was actually the first one that I bought because it was supposed to have, or it does have, the errata in it for like magic items and prices and stuff like that. So that was the reason I bought this, and then I just decided, well, I've got that, I may as well get the other two books, and that's sort of what I did. And then my copy of the Monster Manual for 3.5 is this one here. I might try to go back and see if I can find a version of the 3.5 Monster Manual, the original one. If I can get it for, in good shape and in a decent price, I might pick it up just to sort of have again and fill out that slipcase again. But it's not something that's like a high priority for me. Alright, up next we have some sequels to the core books. So the first one is Player's Handbook 2. If you were playing 3.5 D&D, this was basically an essential pickup. The Player's Handbook 2 had all kinds of great new elements to it. There were some new classes, I believe. There were alternate versions of the different classes, so they had substitution features. So for example, the druid's wild shape was always kind of finicky, I guess you could say, in the way that it worked, because it was based off of like the polymorph stuff, which changed with almost every book that came out for 3.5. There were updates to it. So you could get rid of wild shape, and instead you could get, like, you take on aspects of creatures that acted more like a barbarian's rage. So there was stuff like that that was really, really cool. Lots of awesome stuff in this book. This was, again, if you were playing 3rd edition or if you want to get into 3.5 as a player, this is something that I highly, highly recommend. The core rule books, and I think even the Player's Handbook 2 are available on DM's Guild. I know the core rule books, I think you can get those print on demand. I know you can with like 2nd and 1st edition. I'm pretty sure you can with the 3rd edition 3.5 books as well. But this is one, again, that it was just a huge benefit for, like, this is one of the most used books beyond the regular core books for any of the players in my group at the time. So really, really awesome book. Then we have the DMG2. And what's kind of interesting about this book is if you look at things like 5th edition now with the Ghost of Saltmarsh book, the town of Saltmarsh is actually fully fleshed out in this book. It's not the first place that it ever appeared in, obviously, but this the DMG2 was sort of geared towards beginners, so beginning DMs, with beginning players. It had a lot of stuff on world building and encounter building and stuff like that. It's really, really good book, a really, really good read, especially if you're getting into the hobby. There's a lot of cool stuff in here, but they did actually fully detail Saltmarsh, as well as they had like some alternate types of magic items. So instead of I don't want to get into it too much, but they had like enhancements you could put on weapons that were like things like a flaming weapon, but it was called like Flaming Surge. So you could like up to, I think it was 3 times per day for a gold piece cost, a much lower gold piece cost. You could put this on your weapon. So 3 times per day, if you struck with your weapon, you could do like an extra 1d6 fire damage or 2d6 fire damage or something like that. So just some cool stuff overall. If you are a veteran, I don't know how much you're going to use this book, but for beginners, this was really, really great. All right. I think I grabbed a couple of 3.0 books, so let's just get those out of the way right now, because I'm pretty sure these were my 3.0 videos. Monster Manual 2 is 3.0. This came out well before 3.5. I just wasn't filtering stuff, I don't think, too well. Of the Monster Manuals, other than, like, this is one of the weakest ones in my opinion, so it's got a cool looking cover, but you're not really missing too much there. And then there was the Fiend Folio, which was a much better book. But again, this is actually 3.0, although this came out around the time that I think 3.5 was already this came out in April 2003, and I think it was July or June of 2003 that 3.5 came out. So this is a 3.0 book, probably shouldn't be in this video, but I was just grabbing stuff off the shelf. I do have 2 Monster Manuals here that are for 3.5. So we got the Monster Manual 3. Again, kind of a neat looking cover. This, honestly, like these designs kind of remind me a little bit of like the detailing on the Xenomorph's arm from like the Alien franchise. Just sort of with these, those designs there. I don't know, it might just be me, but a really, really cool design. A few interesting monsters. Overall, I really didn't use this too much. I think I liked like the Bone Claw, and they had like a Death Giant, which I really liked it. And I think there was an Eldritch Giant in here too. So there were a few monsters that I really, really liked. But overall, this one was actually kind of disappointing as well. What wasn't disappointing was the Monster Manual 4. So this book, it was a huge improvement over any of the previous Monster Manuals. In addition to having stats for creatures, it had some of the more iconic monsters that you might encounter in D&D. Like they had stats for like different types of orcs, goblins, gnolls, stuff like that. But they sort of made it like, like almost like a warband kind of thing. So you had, instead of just the straight monster that you had in the original monster manual, you had stats for like a shaman, a warlord, a berserker. You just had all these really, really well done stat blocks that you could use to create encounters literally just out of the books. Because in 3rd edition and 3.5, creating encounters, like monster encounters, if you wanted them to fill certain roles, you'd have to give them class levels. So you'd have, if you wanted a shaman, for example, you might make a druid or a cleric orc, like half orc or orc. Or if you wanted a berserker, you'd make, an orc barbarian. And it was a lot of work. It took time to make these things. So this gave you that already. So it had a lot of that stuff statted out in really, really cool ways. But they also had like maps, layers and stuff like that. So there was some, just a lot of stuff that you could literally just pull out of this book for a session if you didn't have anything planned or you weren't expecting to run. But if you had friends that, wanted to try it out, you could literally just pick up this book, open it up, find some creatures, find a map, and you're good to go. So really, really great book. There was also Monster Manual 5, which I believe is very much along those lines. I just never picked it up. This was around the time period that I was filling in for a second when I was working at a gas station. I was the assistant manager. The manager had temporarily taken on another site a couple of towns over. And he needed someone to help fill in there because he was having staffing issues and stuff like that. So, but I was still doing the morning paperwork at both sites, and I was walking. So I would be getting up at like 3:30 in the morning, walking into the nearest location, doing the paperwork, and then taking a taxi to the place I was going to be working at for a 9-hour day because the other employees were all in school. So they weren't able to get there until 4 instead of 7 to 3. Actually, it was a 10-hour day because it was 6 to 4 was what I was working. Anyway, it was basically my entire life for 6 months was basically get up in the morning, go into work, do paperwork, go to my work that I was going to work for 10 hours, have to wait another hour to catch a bus, get home, eat, go to bed, and wake up. So it was just at a bad time for me. Like, I just had no energy to do anything. So when that book came out, I just wasn't interested in it at the time, and I figured that I'd sort of get an urge to pick it up later, but that never happened. And it's something that I really wish I had picked that up now, like in retrospect. And it is one of the books that I constantly check, DM's Guild for. I think they have the PDF version, but PDFs, just reading off computer screens, really bothers my eyes. I desperately need to get them tested. It just costs money. So I'm waiting for a physical version, or if I can find a good copy of it locally, but that hasn't ever happened. But Monster Manual 5 is another good book. It's just one that I don't have, but this one was awesome. Alright, a couple of odds and ends, I guess, here. I'm not really going in any super particular order. And I am still dealing with a cold, so, forgive me. So, just a couple of things here. So the first thing we'll show is the Dungeon Master screen. I unfolded this for a separate video, but you can sort of see that's what the art looked like there. This was one of the earlier versions of what's called the landscape DM screens, which is pretty much the standard layout or format for screens now since this came out. And it's great for if you're running a game at a table and you're using minis, so you need to see over top of the screen to where the minis are, or if you want to make sure that your players are being honest about their roles, so you can sort of see over the screen for that. So this is one of the earliest versions of that kind of screen. I'm not going to say it's the first, obviously, but for D&D at least, for 3rd edition 3.5, this was the first screen along those lines. It did also include a D20 Modern screen, but I wasn't interested in D20 Modern at the time. I don't have any D20 Modern stuff, and I had a friend who wanted to run the D20 version of Gamma World. which used the D20 Modern rules. So I gave him the screen for that. Because I was just never going to use it. It was literally just going to sit and do nothing, so I figured that I got the screen that I wanted, and I would rather the one that I wasn't interested in go to someone who would appreciate it and use it. So that's what happened there. So this is just the paper cover that goes over top of it, but this is a really, really cool screen. I absolutely love it. Oh. And then we also have, this wasn't a retail item, but this was the copy of the 2006 Worldwide D&D Game Day Adventure. So this was sort of like an organized store event sort of thing. And this includes the adventure, as well as the character that I played. So they were all pre-made characters. I didn't get the other copy, like everyone who participated got their copy of the character. But I managed to keep mine. We have it here, and this was actually the first time I played the character whose name is now shared by this channel. And the characters were not super well done. They were missing. Using the point buy system, they weren't quite done right. They had also missed the attribute increase for reaching level 4. So that was a little bit disappointing. The person running it, he was running it at a store. He did allow us to modify the character. Also allowed us to pick up some extra equipment because the character that I had was an archer that only had 20 arrows, and you can go through those arrows pretty quick. It was a combat-heavy adventure, so but it does include the adventure, the map, and like I said, the character that I was playing. I also have a package of the minis that were used, but they're not, I guess, easily accessible right now. But really, really cool to have that. And then there's my D&D basic game. I already did an unboxing everything for this video, or for this channel as well. So, but this was essentially your starter set, your beginner box, whatever you want to call it. Excuse me. For 3.5, and this was a really, really cool box. The adventure was pretty good. It came with like the plastic minis because the D&D mini game was out at the time. It had the Black Dragon, which is my favorite looking dragon in all of Dungeons and Dragons. I guess really all of any draconic design that I've ever seen. I don't know, I just loved like the horns. I loved sort of the skeletal look of the face. Just absolutely awesome. A friend of mine actually ran this for me, and he actually got me with one of the encounters. I'm not going to spoil that, but there was a pretty big fake out, and I had read the adventure, but I forgot about that, and it actually like legitimately got me. So it was just kind of a neat moment for that to happen. So yeah. All right. All right, so this is definitely going to be a two-part video. I'm just looking at what I've got versus what I've talked about so far. So up next, I'm just going to go into some types of environmental or thematic types of source books. So Wizards of the Coast did release some like climate-based supplement books. They had Frostburn and Sandstorm. So Frostburn was running sort of Arctic-based or cold-based environments. Sandstorm was the opposite. It was running like desert themes, stuff like that. I didn't pick those two books up because I wasn't super interested in it, but I did get this one here, which is Storm Rack. So this is Mastering the Perils of Wind and Wave, and this book was on sale for like $7. It was being cleared out at a bookstore in the mall where I lived, so I saw that, and for that price, even though I wasn't interested in the other two, this was something that was like for $7, you can't lose. So I picked this up. I never got a chance to really use it, but the Savage Tide Adventure Path, which was the final adventure path that Paizo was able to do for Dungeon Magazine before Wizards of the Coast canceled the physical print and did the online version, which I don't really want to talk about because it's still a bit of a sore spot to this day. But the Savage Tide one actually made use of this book, so I was originally planning on running that, so it was kind of fortuitous that I was able to find it. But I never really had any experience with this book. So again, some of these were coming out at the time in which I just was too busy to really spend a lot of time reading. So I don't have a lot of super personal experience with some of these books coming up, but just explain sort of why I decided to pick them up. Up next we have Cityscape. So this is an essential guide to urban adventuring. So this is giving information on like creating urban sort of adventures, to how you can use sort of the dungeon making conventions within a city sort of thing. Again, I think I've honestly probably only opened up the cover of this book maybe once or twice, unfortunately. It's something that I would like to actually get into and maybe read and even potentially do a review of at some point in the near future. One of the benefits of this channel is that, it sort of gives me a reason to do that. But this is one I just never really got a chance to do anything with. But I bought it, I guess, with the best of intentions. And then we have Dungeonscape. So this is Essential Guide to Dungeon Adventuring. And pretty similar to Cityscape. I think I've opened this book up a grand total of twice since I first bought it. But it does have a beholder on the cover, and honestly, that was all, and on the back. And truthfully, that was all the incentive that I needed. I think, actually, when I bought Cityscape and Dungeonscape, I didn't realize they were connected to the Sandstorm, Frostburn, and Stormwracked series. Until I sort of took a closer look at the covers and noticed that they were designed very similarly. But this is another one of those ones that I would love to spend some time reading and looking through at some point. All right, so I think that's going to wrap it up for part 1. But there will be a part 2 and hopefully not a part 3. I think I'm going to try to make sure I wrap everything up in part 2, even if it's a longer video. But I wanted to get this one out, and part 2 will probably be coming out in a couple of days. So, make sure you check that out. And let me know in the comments below if you've picked up, if you own any of the books that you've seen so far in this video. And, what your experiences were, what your thoughts were with them, because I'd certainly love to know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed part 1, because we are just getting started. And be sure to come back for part 2. Until then, thanks for watching, and we'll see you then.